My mom picked my mean stepsister over me and made me leave home. Years later, I'm getting married and the company I work for canceled the contract with my stepsister's husband. Now she's angry with me and blaming me for it. I'm 26 years old and engaged to my fiancé, Jeff, who is also 26. We met on a dating app 4 years ago and have been together ever since. Jeff is my soulmate, the one person who has always been there for me. Growing up wasn't easy for me. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old, and my dad never really stayed in touch. He paid child support but didn't make an effort to be a part of my life. My mom, who is now 48, wasn't the best mom either. She was more interested in other things than taking care of me. I was mostly raised by nannies or babysitters because she was busy with her own social life. She was young when she had me, and her priorities were different. She liked going out with friends or on dates rather than being a hands-on mom. My mom wasn't very focused on her career either. She worked as a freelance artist and made enough money each month, mostly because of the child support my dad paid. Without that money, I think she would have wanted me to leave a long time ago. She never seemed attached to me and often made me feel like she was just waiting for me to grow up and leave her alone. When I was 13, she started dating my stepfather, Matt, who was 50. He had a daughter my age, Jess. When my mom introduced us to Matt's family, she told me to behave well, which was unusual because she never cared about my behavior with her previous boyfriends. Usually she'd just tell me she had guests coming and I'd stay in my room until they left. But this time, it felt different. It seemed like she was serious about Matt, otherwise she wouldn't have cared about how I acted or even my presence in the house. The first time I met Matt and Jess, they were pretty nice, and it was a pleasant meeting. But things changed quickly. Matt started coming over more often, and soon it felt like they were living with us. At first, it didn't bother me much. As long as they didn't disturb me, I didn't really care what they did. This went on for a while. They were practically living here, and Jess would visit too. She spent half of her time with her mom. At first, they were okay with me or just ignored me, which was fine by me because I didn't care much for any of them. I just wanted peace and quiet. But then they decided to move in permanently. Now, I wouldn't have cared much about this, but my mom told me that since they were moving in together, I had to share my room with my stepsister. I refused and said I wouldn't do it because it was my room. I had always had that room, and it was the only place in the house where I felt peaceful. I had a little corner all to myself, and I didn't want to give up my freedom by sharing it with someone I barely knew. When I told my mom that I wasn't going to share my room, we had a huge argument. She said she would kick me out of the house if I didn't do what she said. I was 14 then, and even though I was young, I knew the law. I knew she couldn't actually kick me out until I was an adult, or she could get into trouble. So I told her that I knew she couldn't do it and that she was just bluffing. She was angry but had to let me keep my room. Instead, she decided to turn the basement into Jess's room. It wasn't a bad place, it just wasn't as nice as my room, but my mom worked hard to make it better and livable. By the time she finished, it looked just as good as any other room in the house, so I didn't understand why it was a big deal. But for some reason, that's when Jess started hating me. It might have been because, on the day she moved in, my mom gave them a house tour and made sure to tell everyone that Jess had to live in the basement because I wasn't ready to share my room. I didn't get why my mom would say something like that, and I still don't know why she did it. Maybe she wanted me to feel guilty about not sharing my room by saying it in front of Jess. But it just made me feel weird and uncomfortable. It was embarrassing for both of us. I didn't feel bad about standing my ground. Maybe my mom just wanted drama and wanted Jess to know that I refused to share my room, which would cause problems between us. Jess didn't seem like the type to let something like that go. My mom was right. Jess didn't let it go, and after that day, she started treating me like an enemy. Jess still spent half the month with her mom, but the days she lived with us were awful for me. She became a real menace and had it out for me. She was constantly mean and said horrible things to my face. For example, she once said my dad probably left my mom because of me, and then laughed like it was the funniest thing ever. She made fun. Earlier, she and her friends would usually just ignore me, and I preferred it that way. Jess and I were never friends, but ignoring each other was much better than being enemies. The saddest part was that I hadn't done anything to her. She was just mad because I didn't want to share my room with her. It was a silly reason to hate me and make my life miserable. My room was my safe space, and with a mother like mine, it's understandable that I wanted some space of my own. Besides, if anyone had actually tried to get to know me, I might have shared my room with Jess. But she was a stranger, and I didn't feel comfortable giving up my freedom for her. I never complained about it to my mom or Matt because they already knew, and it was pointless. They didn't care. I could get bullied all my life, and they would still ignore it because I wasn't important to them. So I just had to endure it and let Jess walk all over me. I would fight back sometimes, but that only made things worse. Our parents would get involved, and I would end up getting grounded because they disliked me. Jess would cry a little and avoid trouble, but I couldn't cry on command like her and wasn't that manipulative. So I would be the one punished and told to treat Jess like my sister, while she got away with everything. It was a terrible place to grow up, and I hated my life. So around my 18th birthday, when I finally got kicked out, I was more relieved than anything. I had dealt with my family's craziness for years, and it only got worse over time. Jess continued to be a nightmare, and our parents always supported her without questioning her actions. Over 4 years, she managed to turn almost everyone in our high school against me. I had only a couple of friends who would even talk to me. Everyone else hated me just because Jess did. It took a toll on my mental health, and I struggled in every way. I gained a lot of weight from binge eating, which changed my appearance for the worse. I was overweight, had acne, and my hair was a mess. My grades suffered too, so I not only looked bad but seemed dumb to everyone else. I felt like I had nothing going for me and was at an all-time low. Things at home weren't any better because I still had to deal with Jess and my parents. My mom had become even more unbearable, constantly comparing me to Jess despite knowing that she was the one making my life so much worse. Things were bad before my mom married Matt, and they moved in together, but they weren't this bad. Before, it was upsetting that my mom didn't care about me, but after her marriage, it felt like I went from the frying pan into the fire. She went from not caring to actively making me feel bad about myself. It felt like I was living with mean girls at home too. It was clear to me that Jess was the daughter my mom actually wanted. It seemed like life had given her the wrong cards and she got stuck with me instead. Both of them wanted me gone, and honestly, I felt the same way. My mom and Jess hated me, and Matt didn't care. I had no family to turn to other than my mom. My grandparents weren't in touch with us, and I never knew my dad or his side of the family. I had nowhere to go and felt weird asking my friends for help. So I had to tough it out and stay with my mom to at least have a roof over my head and food to eat until I turned 18. But then a couple of weeks before my birthday, an incident happened, and I was kicked out that very day. It was a weekend, and I still remember it as if it happened yesterday because it was one of the most traumatic and stressful days of my life. Around that time, we had both just graduated, and Jess had started hanging out with a larger group of people. She had a friend whose brother was in his last year of college, and she was dating her friend's brother. So she and her friend would hang out with his friends, who all happened to be older than us. I knew all about the kinds of things they got up to, but I didn't think it was worth bringing up with my parents because, with my luck, it would probably just backfire. So I never told anyone that Jess had started drinking. Even though I couldn't prove it, I knew she was smoking weed and other stuff. I was never into any of that because, first of all, I didn't have friends who had access to alcohol and cigarettes, let alone drugs. Secondly, I was already struggling with my weight and grades. I didn't need to add alcohol and drugs to the mix. I had enough on my plate as it was. But that day, I think I must have left my room unlocked before I went for a shower. The next thing I knew, I heard banging on the bathroom door. My mother was screaming at me, demanding that I come out right now. I had to hurry and put on my clothes so I could see what was going on. When I came out of the shower, my mother, Matt, and Jess were waiting in my room, all with very serious looks on their faces. My mother pulled out a bunch of empty beer bottles from under my bed, and even more incriminating, there was a huge plastic baggie filled with weed. I knew it wasn't mine, and so did Jess, but my parents didn't know that. Somehow, she had planted it in my room while I was out, and then told my mom about it. They started freaking out and yelling at me about what a horrible person I was. My mom didn't just scream at me about the alcohol and drugs, she also went off about how I was a total disappointment. She complained about me eating all the food and said I was a waste. She was sure I would never amount to anything and that I would just keep living with them and wasting their money. I tried to tell her multiple times that none of it belonged to me and that I didn't even know how it ended up in my room, but she didn't believe me. She got even angrier when I suggested that maybe Jess had put it there to get me in trouble. She yelled at me, saying I was always jealous of Jess and would never be as good as her at anything, which is why I was trying to shift the blame. I was crying a lot by that point, but she didn't seem to care and kept yelling. After a while, she stopped screaming and said I had to leave. I didn't understand and asked where I was supposed to go. She said she didn't care but wanted me out of the house because she was done dealing with me. When I said I wasn't leaving, she threatened to call the police on me. Since I was almost 18, she said they would take the drug charges seriously. She said she didn't want an addict living with her and using her money and resources. She told me I had to look out for myself now because she was done pretending to have a happy family with someone who didn't deserve it. I kept pleading with her not to kick me out because, even though I wanted to leave, I had nowhere to go and no money of my own. But my mother didn't care. She told me that if I didn't leave that day, she would call the police on me. I was shocked by how heartless she was, and even more so that neither Matt nor Jess objected. They just went about their day as if nothing was happening. After a lot of crying and begging, I started packing my things. Between getting arrested for drugs and living on the streets, I would choose the streets. I finished packing by the evening, and when I left the house, nobody said goodbye to me, and I didn't look back either. I went to the park and sat on a bench for a couple of hours, but it started getting really cold. So I decided to go to a friend's place to spend the night, hoping they would let me stay. I went to my best friend Amy's house and asked if I could stay with her for a couple of days. She already knew how my parents were, so I didn't have to explain much. I told her what had happened that day, and she was shocked. She said her parents could help me if I let them. I had always kept quiet about how my parents treated me, even to Amy's parents, because I wasn't sure if people would believe me. I guess I felt weird sharing these personal details of my life. But that day, Amy insisted I tell her parents everything, and they were just as horrified as she had been. They got on a call with my mother, but it didn't help at all. She was quite rude to them, and they realized talking to her wouldn't make the situation better. Then they did something I can never thank them enough for. They told me I could live with them for as long as I needed to, and they would support me. They were wealthy, so money wasn't a problem, and Amy loved me enough to share her room. I spent the next couple of years living with them, attending community college because of my bad grades. I started working and saving money to find my own place, but Amy's parents made sure I never felt pressured to move out and made me as comfortable as possible. About 3 years ago, I had finally saved enough to move out. I was proud of myself and so grateful to Amy and her parents. I couldn't have done it without them. Even on the day I moved out, they helped me settle into my new place and said I was welcome back anytime. That was a turning point for me. I had lost a lot of weight and my health had improved. I felt and looked better. I was earning enough to support myself and had spent enough time working on myself. So I decided to start dating because I wanted to get married eventually and I had to start looking. Before Jeff, I met a few guys, but those relationships never went far. When I met Jeff, I finally understood why. We were meant to be together, and the others were just meant for fun. When I started dating, I didn't know he was rich and the heir to his family's company. I liked him because he was funny, cute, and seemed to really like me too. After a couple of months, he told me about his family's business, and I learned he would inherit it soon. Knowing how rich he was didn't change my feelings for him. I saw him the same way as before, and I loved him just as much. We moved in together after a year of dating, and he introduced me to his family a few months earlier. They all liked me, and we got along well. Everything felt perfect, so when he asked me to marry him recently, saying yes was easy. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and everything has been great. But then about 2 weeks ago, I got an email from Jess. We haven't talked in almost 8 years, and I haven't heard from my family since I got kicked out. I was surprised she reached out, especially to make things right. It's been so long, and neither of us cared enough to try fixing things. So when I read the email and saw she was apologizing for the past and admitting she was awful to me, I was confused. She even said she planned to get me kicked out because she hated me for no reason. I didn't understand why she was confessing all this after so many years, and it felt strange. The timing seemed suspicious because I had just gotten engaged, and Jess must have known because I posted about it on social media. We went to the same high school, so she might have heard from someone there. Everything felt odd, so I decided to investigate. I found out that Jess's husband owned the business supplying plastic containers for takeaway orders to Jeff's restaurants. It was easy for me to find out. I made a fake profile and checked her page. Her husband mentioned his work in his bio, so it wasn't hard to figure out. Since I already knew a lot about Jeff's business, I knew this was the guy he dealt with. I told Jeff right away. In the past few years, I've tried not to think about my old life and haven't followed anyone from my family online. I've even told my friends not to tell me any news about them, so I didn't know Jess was married until recently. When I found out her husband was dealing with us, Jeff and I decided to cancel our contract. It was costing us a lot, and I couldn't bear the thought of working with Jess again, even in business. Jeff also said the quality of the products her husband supplied had gone down a lot, and they were considering finding a new supplier anyway. So last week, a few days after I got that email from Jess, Jeff decided to meet with her husband and cancel the contract. For some reason, Jess thinks I canceled the contract on purpose to get back at her. She's been accusing me of that in emails and social media posts. We haven't talked in almost 10 years, but she still believes I'm holding a grudge, which might be partly true, but that's not why her husband lost our contract. She made a post recently saying a lot of clients were dropping them anyway, and this was the last straw. But she claims I did it out of spite, which she thinks is unprofessional. She tagged our Facebook page in her post, and it's causing a mess. I feel bad for her because she mentioned they've been losing clients left and right. Part of this was personal, but a lot of it was professional too. I don't think Jeff and his father would have dropped her husband as their supplier just because of me. Still, I can't help feeling sorry for her. Update 1. Alright, so Jeff talked to his dad's lawyers, and his dad agrees with our decision. We're taking legal action against them and demanding they remove that post. We're also pressing charges for defamation because the guy was overcharging us and giving us bad products. If we found a better deal somewhere else, we were going to take it. It just happened that Jess's husband ran that business. Instead of improving their company, she decided to badmouth us on social media. It's crazy how I felt sorry for her after everything she put me through. Thanks to all your comments, I realized I shouldn't have. Many of you have been supportive, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks for all the support. Update 2. Jeff and his father filed a defamation lawsuit against Jess and her husband a couple of days ago. We're meeting with a court-appointed mediator soon. Meanwhile, my mother has taken it upon herself to defend her stepdaughter once again. It feels ridiculous, like I'm back in high school. But thankfully, I'm not. I can ignore everything they say because I don't rely on my mother for a roof over my head anymore. She can cry about it, but it won't change anything. She's been trying to reach me since Jess was served, but I've blocked her and moved on. I don't need that negativity. I'm engaged and about to marry the man of my dreams, and the last thing I need is my mother or her stepdaughter back in my life.